Hello, welcome back. It has been a couple weeks since I released my last video, and it has been kind of hard to get back in the swing of things. I have a little bit of hobby inertia, and so when I'm going, I'm going, and when I'm not, it's really hard to get back in the swing of things. While I wasn't looking, I broke 100 subscribers, so that's really cool and exciting. So thank you everyone for being here. Today is my second paper lab video, and I will be talking about Maruman Mnemosyne. Don't come at me for that pronunciation. I checked both the Japanese and the Greek pronunciation of Mnemosyne, and that's how it's pronounced. It is, well, okay. The notebook that I have is an A5 notebook with dot grid paper on the inside. It is in a layout that they call special memory layout. It has a space at the top for the date and the title, and then the rest is dot grid. You can also get it lined or blank. I think that there are some that are in a landscape orientation, and I think they have a line of completely blank papers. I'm not sure. The other thing that this paper has is some micro perforation along the ring, so you can easily remove it. And that is how I am going to remove it from this notebook so that we can do the testing and the writing samples. So let's get into it. Before I start discussing the stats of this paper, I do want to address something that you will see really quickly here. I pull out 3 pages of the Mnemosyne paper instead of 2, like I did for the last video. The reason that I did this is because I realized that there was a gap in the writing samples that I did last time. Some papers react differently to hand oils than they do if you've got like a protective sheet over them. And I was really curious to see if this would be one of the papers that reacted to hand oils. So I pulled out 3 sheets of paper. I made sure that my hands were nice and moisturized, and I covered up the first page of the writing sample, and then the second page was unprotected. So you'll see that actually did make a difference in the end for what kind of feathering and bleed through you see with all 3 inks that I ended up using. The third ink of the writing samples is a new addition to this paper lab video. It is Diamine Cinnabon from 2023's Inkvent calendar. It is a scented ink, and when I used it with a dip pen, I did notice that it was very poorly behaved, and so I wanted to use something that would just be a menace on any paper that I could throw it on. So we'll see how it does. As I mentioned at the beginning, this is the Maruman Mnemosyne paper. It is 80 GSM, and the brand itself is a Japanese paper company. There is a lot less information on this paper than there is about Tomoe River, because I think it is a lot less dramatic than the Tomoe River paper saga has been, and so it's just kind of quietly going about its business. It is often touted as a more affordable option to some fancier fountain pen papers, and while that may be true for some really super niche papers like Cosmo Air Light or Cosmo Air Snow, both of which are no longer going to be made in the future, or I think even the Aerofil paper, it is not less expensive than Tomoe River paper, at least right now. The Tomoe River Sanzen that is on the market, they are both about 10 cents a page for A5 size notebooks. So, if you are using Mnemosyne because you think that it is a lot more cost effective than Tomoe River paper, sheet for sheet, it's not. What it does have is a wider variety of options for notebook sizes, formats, and bindings. So I mentioned at the top of the video that you can find these in landscape format, you can find them spiral bound. You can't normally get that kind of binding with Tomoe River paper. So there is something to consider there for, what you're using this for. So this still may be a better option for some people. So that is something to consider. I tend to prefer A5, and for certain papers I tend to prefer loose leaf so that I can write letters with them. But not everybody uses paper for the same purposes, so imagine that. Before I move on to how this paper behaved under various conditions, I do want to talk just a little bit about the format. I have struggled to find this Mnemosyne paper in any other format but this special memory style. And I gotta say, it's not my favorite. And while it is certainly a useful format to have with this date, title, and then writing space, I use it for taking notes for my D&D games. But it's a lot less useful for letter writing or even freeform journaling, I think. I'm not a huge fan of the perforated sides. I'm not a huge fan of the date and title up at the top. But, overall it writes all right. It has a little bit of texture. It's a little bit heavier than Tomoe River paper. I think that when I compare it to the Sanzen paper, it's going to be a lot similar. But, and here we're getting into the second page, and so I will start to talk about some of the interesting observations that I had. It is more sensitive to hand oils than I was expecting. So this first page kind of got saturated with maybe a little bit of the lotion that I had put on earlier, just because it's winter time, and so I put lotion on my hands. But the effect that had on the coating really increased the occurrence of feathering, and when this page flips over, you will see that it also dramatically affected how much ink bled through the paper. It was the feathering effect was a lot less pronounced on the backside, because I didn't have my hand resting on it for as long. But there was still a little bit that I noticed down towards the bottom, which is usually where you would see any hand oil effects if it was present on your paper. Overall, though, it wasn't that hard to avoid, and even when I didn't avoid it on the second sheet of paper, it didn't distract from the writing. It was all stuff that happened once the ink was on the paper as opposed to when I was applying it down. So it felt the same to write with, even though my hand was affecting the coating. That is not the case with every paper, and I am hoping that we eventually get to talk about that, but we'll see. This is the Mnemosyne video. What you see now is a close-up of the writing samples. On the first page, where I really tried to protect the paper from the effects of my hand oils, you can see that there is minimal feathering, even from the poorly behaved Cinnabon. There is a little bit of bleed through that you can see with the Pilot Varsity and the Cinnabon, though it's not really very much and it's not distracting to me. The second page is where it really starts to get interesting, in my opinion. Now, this first side is where I was resting my hand to protect the first page from my hand oils, so it really got a chance to work that in there, and you can see that all of the ink's fuzzed, and on the back side, it was a lot less pronounced. Now, I know that somebody is going to watch this someday and be like, well, you should have washed your hands before you started writing, you dummy. And I think that's not the tack to take. I think that you should be able to use paper in whatever condition you're in, and it should be able to work properly. But, as I said before, this really only affected the performance of the paper and did not affect how it felt to write on it, which was very good. This next page, where I test out the different ink properties and see how the shading of Autumn Oak and the polychromatic shader and how sheen looks and shimmer. I still, as I am speaking, do not know how to organize my thoughts on this, because I want to say up front that I did not dislike writing on this paper. It was pleasant. I didn't have any issues with the coating. It didn't feel like writing on clay, which some papers can feel like. It felt normal. It felt like paper is supposed to feel, until I got to the Pilot Kakunos. And maybe this was a problem with my Pilot Kakunos, but both of them scratched through the paper every time I tried to write sideways. So the nib was going sideways across the paper, and it broke through the coating. It tore the paper. And you'll see me kind of adjust here in a second with the Emerald Chicken when I do the block swatch right here. I'm struggling, and I tore the paper. And I still don't know how to feel about this. Like, I had noticed that there was some scratchiness when I was putting the Autumn Oak down. I'll talk about that a little bit in a minute. And when I was writing the Tsutsuji, it had the same thing happen. When I was writing sideways, it felt scratchy. It was the strangest thing. And I knew that the tear in the coating was going to affect the drop test that I do with the water droplet. And you will see in just a moment that it sure did. So this is interesting. These up at the top are staying fairly well beaded, but these down at the bottom, well, those aren't doing so well. Now what's interesting about this, I think this would affect feathering quite a bit, but what's interesting about this is none of the pens that I have to test for feathering that I saw some feathering on the writing sample, wrong pens. Only one of them is Pilot, and that is the Pilot Varsity. The other two, I had two Platinums, a Preppy and a Profante, and this one was written by a Platinum Profante. Now, the interesting thing about this one is that I did notice that there was some scratchiness here. You can see if you... I can't say if you feel it because this is a video. Hello. But I can feel some physical damage to the paper from where the nib went over it. And when these little beads are dry, I will flip the page over and you can see that that physical damage did in fact result in some more significant bleed through, especially on the Jacquardin. Ooh, I'm going to make those spread. But this is so interesting to me, the difference between these little water beads. So, anyways, yeah. You can see on the back of the paper that damage to the coating does affect the bleed through qualities of the paper. Not where the water was dropped. It did that on the Tomoe River paper that affects the coating anyway, but where the pen actually damaged the coating and was able to soak through the fibers. Now, you can blame the pen, but Pilot Kakunos are not really known for being poor quality pens. They're pretty good, especially for their price. So, my thoughts about this paper end up being pretty complicated. I think that it showed standard ink as you would expect. It showed off shading pretty well, and sheen was okay. You'll see in a second that you could see this sheen on Tsutsuji, but not on Emerald de Chivor. There was no dual tone aspects to Fuji at all. So that's kind of a point against it. Overall, emotionally, I really enjoyed using this paper, but from a practical perspective, it just didn't perform. Anyways, I hope that you all feel that I have been fair, at least, to Mnemosyne paper. I think that it is an enjoyable paper to write on, which is actually, in my case, a lot more difficult than you would think. There are a lot of specifically fountain pen papers that I cannot stand, that I hate so much. I will not name names. It'll be a surprise when we get there. But I think that there are some drawbacks that are not there in Tomoe River paper, for example. I don't have a whole lot more to add to that. Anyways, I hope that you all enjoyed my quasi deep dive into the Mnemosyne paper. If you liked this video, like and subscribe. Thank you, everybody who has subscribed. I cannot believe that we are, I say we, like There are multiple people in my channel. Nope, just me. I cannot believe that this channel has already hit triple digits. That's bananas. So I will see you all next week. I had a bit of a magpie moment. I have a lot of things to show off, kind of like an unboxing, but next week I will probably do something a little bit crazy and Frankenstein a Gene Howe, so that'll be fun. Yeah, I'll see you guys next week. Bye. Are you wanting a treat? Is that why you followed me out here? You want a treat? Yeah, you want a treat. You want a treat, huh? Yep, yes you do. This is like one of the few drawers you can't get into, huh? Little lemur. Little mole child. Oh yeah. Oh yeah, you were way into this. You were so excited. Okay. All right. Okay. All right. Okay. All right. Can you sit? Good boy. It's like Mama was already sitting.